The scent of my father's bankruptcy was a unique blend of stale cigar smoke and desperation. It clung to the curtains of our sprawling, empty-feeling mansion, a ghost of the fortune we'd once had. On the day his empire finally crumbled, I learned he had quietly settled his accounts by selling off his most inconvenient asset, me. I was to be married into the formidable Vance family. The gossips who had once clamored for invitations to our parties, now whispered behind their hands. They said that Julian Vance, the sole heir, had been shattered by a racing accident. His temper was a volatile storm, they murmured, and he would spend his life imprisoned in a wheelchair, never to stand again. A coldness seeped into my bones, not from fear of the man or his chair, but from the chilling realization of my own worth. I was a commodity, a balance sheet entry to be traded. There was a time I'd believed in a different kind of arithmetic. I thought that love could outweigh poverty, that holding the hand of the man you cherished was a currency more valuable than any other. That belief had led me, just a week prior, to secretly take the household registry, my heart fluttering with a nervous, hopeful rhythm. I was going to meet Alex, my childhood sweetheart, and we were going to elope. I saw them before they saw me. There, on the steps of the civic registry, Alex was leading another girl by the hand. Her laughter, like tinkling glass, carried across the square. It was Chloe, the daughter my father had brought home after my mother's mysterious death, the sister whose presence had always felt like an invasion. In my first life, the one that ended in tragedy, I had run to them. I had screamed, I had wept, I had demanded answers in a spectacle of raw, humiliating pain. Alex had immediately shielded Chloe, standing as her protector. His words were branded into my soul. Chloe's background is already tarnished. Marrying into the Vance family to a man like Julian, it would destroy her. He's a monster in a chair. But you, Alaire, you're strong. You can handle anything. My strength, it seemed, was a justification for my sacrifice. This time I stood motionless. I watched as the official photographer, charmed by their youthful allure, chose them as the model newlyweds of the day. The camera flashed, capturing their picture-perfect smiles. When Alex's eyes accidentally met mine across the plaza, his smile fractured and a flicker of pure panic crossed his face. I felt nothing. No rage, no heartbreak, just a vast, icy calm. Chloe, nestled against his side, curled her lips into a smug, triumphant smile aimed directly at me. I knew she didn't love him. This was just another move in her endless game to push me out, to force me into the gilded cage she was too delicate to endure, so that our father would have no choice but to send me to Julian Vance. 3 years ago, my father had made a reckless wager with the Vances, borrowing a sum so vast it was abstract. 15 billion. A series of failed ventures had bled our century-old company dry, and it still wasn't enough. Julian, once the dazzling prince of our city, had been broken in a crash that left him paralyzed. His reputation for being domineering and cruel meant that no family of good standing would offer their daughter, despite the Vance fortune being the largest in the city. To settle the debt, my father had agreed to a proposal from Julian's mother. Send a daughter. The Ward family had two. Me, Alaire Ward, and Chloe, the illegitimate child my father had legitimized after my mother was gone. I never wanted her life, but in her eyes I was always the obstacle. Stealing Alex from me was her masterstroke. As Alex stood frozen in his guilt, I turned and walked away. I didn't go home. I went directly to the most exclusive jeweler in the city and collected a custom-ordered gift for my future mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance. My arrival at the Vance estate was a shock that rippled through the silent, opulent halls. Eleanor Vance knew, from sources I could easily guess, about my failed elopement attempt. Her demeanor was a glacier. "I am accustomed to chilly receptions, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice steady as I presented the velvet box. Inside was a 30-carat diamond bracelet, elegant and impossibly expensive. A small token of my respect. She barely glanced at it. "Is that all?" "No," I said, placing a second, more utilitarian box on the table between us. It was a set of specialized acupuncture equipment, designed for nerve regeneration. "This is for your son." Her sharp eyes, the color of flint, narrowed and finally focused on me with genuine interest. "You practice medicine?" I didn't lie. Before my mother passed, she was paralyzed. Her post-operative care and daily rehabilitation fell entirely to me. Her expression didn't soften, but it shifted. "Your family couldn't afford nurses?" We hired them, I replied, swallowing the bitter memory. But my mother was a proud woman. For the more intimate care she preferred me. It gave her a semblance of dignity. The truth was uglier. My mother had been paralyzed chasing my father's mistress. When she woke and understood her condition, she refused to eat, terrified of being a burden to me. I had flown back from my studies in France, dropped out, and devoted 7 years of my life to her, fighting to keep her spirit alive. The ward fortune meant nothing to me compared to her. But in the end she left me anyway, unwilling to let her daughter's youth be sacrificed at her bedside, unwilling to see me become a penniless orphan cast out by my father. It was for her that I had endured my father and Chloe for so long. Eleanor Vance was silent for a long moment. I would have liked to have met your mother, she said finally, her tone unreadable. She passed, I said simply. But I have significant experience in caring for someone with paralysis. If you permit, I could try to care for your son. A trial period, if you will. I didn't mention marriage. The Vances were already insulted by my past. Pushing would only earn me humiliation. But I knew from the ghost of a life already lived, that more than a daughter-in-law, what Eleanor Vance truly wanted was for her son to want to live again. She instructed a stern-faced housekeeper to lead me to Julian. His room was on the first floor, a master suite modified for convenience. The air outside his door was thick with tension. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. I had seen Julian Vance before. The man they once called the son of Viridia had shone twice as bright as anyone else before his accident. Heir to a colossal fortune, standing 6'3" with the striking, almost cruel beauty of the Vance bloodline, he was intelligent, ruthless in business, and the unattainable fantasy of every debutante. After his accident, shielded by his family, he vanished from public view, yet his legend persisted. I had witnessed the moment the sun was extinguished. The old physician who treated my mother, Dr. Eris, was summoned urgently to the Vance estate. I, his makeshift apprentice after months at his side, accompanied him. The young man on the bed, just 17 then, had eyes that were once open and proud. After the crash, that light had collapsed into something fragile and hollow, devoid of any will to go on. I had assisted Dr. Eris with Julian's first acupuncture session. As we left, I heard his mother's desperate, weeping pleas. He had refused all further treatment after that, tormenting his own broken body. We were strangers then, bound only by a moment of shared crisis. We never could have imagined we would be tied together by a debt and a marriage contract. And I never could have guessed that in my past life, my death would haunt him, that he would be the one to clear my family's debt and give Chloe a massive blood money payout that launched Alex's family into prominence. That money, stained with my past life's suffering, was something I vowed Chloe would never touch in this one. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The air inside was saturated with the scent of medicinal herbs and a faint, clean, cold fragrance like frost. Julian sat with his back to me in his wheelchair, facing the vast, manicured garden. He wore a simple black linen shirt, and the sharp lines of his shoulders and neck were like a blade's edge. "Get out." His voice was low, a winter wind cutting through the room. I didn't. I closed the door softly behind me, set the acupuncture kit on a nearby table and said, "Mr. Vance, I'm here to discuss a deal." He spun the chair around. The face that had once driven the city to a frenzy was pale, almost translucent. A vicious scar ran from his temple to his jaw, but the most terrifying thing was his eyes. They were dark, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth, like a frozen lake waiting to drown the unwary. "Elara Ward," he drawled, his gaze raking over me. "The eldest Ward daughter. I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face here. I know you don't want this marriage," I continued, ignoring his jab. "I don't want to be sold. But I need the Vance family's protection and you need me." A cold, mocking smile touched his lips. "And what could I possibly need you for? You're just another social climber, eyes on the Vance fortune." I walked forward until I stood before him, then I crouched down, forcing myself to look up into those icy depths. "You need me to help you stand again." His expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know why you can't stand," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Most of it is in your mind. Dr. Eris told me your treatment was progressing well. It was you who resisted recovery. In my first life after my death I had learned the truth." His paralysis wasn't truly from the accident. It had been orchestrated by his father's lover. Julian knew that standing again meant re-entering the viper's nest of his family's corporation, a world of filth he wanted no part of. It meant confronting the woman who crippled him who still walked free. And it meant shattering the carefully constructed illusions his mother lived under. He couldn't bear it, so he chose to remain paralyzed. The room was so silent I could hear the rustle of leaves outside the window. Julian's breathing grew heavier, his eyes churning with a storm of emotions I couldn't decipher. After a long, tense moment, he laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Miss Ward, you have a death wish. Do you think you can blackmail me with this?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm offering a transaction. I help you recover and you maintain the engagement, offering me temporary protection. The moment you can stand, we can call it off." He stared at me, his gaze piercing. Then with a sudden, startling movement, he reached out and gripped my chin, his fingers cold and strong. "Temporary protection? If you actually managed to make me stand, my mother would give you the world. What is it you really want, Elara Ward?" I met his gaze unflinchingly. "I want you to get better and I want a shield. Once I've taken back what is rightfully mine from the Ward family, I will leave of my own accord. You're not afraid I'll renege? Burn the bridge after I've crossed it?" "I'm not afraid," I said, my voice steady. "A man of your word, Mr. Vance, would not do such a thing." He released me abruptly, turning his chair back toward the window. "Leave." I recognized it for what it was, a dismissal but also a capitulation. As I gathered my things and closed the door behind me, I heard his voice, low and clear. "Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. A small, grim smile touched my lips. The first move on the board was mine. The silence that greeted me at the Ward mansion was heavier than any shouted accusation. I let myself in, the familiar scent of lemon polish and fading wealth doing nothing to soothe the cold knot in my stomach. I had just hung my coat when the storm broke. A porcelain vase, a relic from my mother's collection, shattered against the wall beside my head. My father, Charles Ward, stood trembling in the center of the foyer, his face a mottled canvas of rage and fear. "You dare to show your face?" he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Alex and Chloe just registered their marriage. The entire city is laughing at us." Behind him, Chloe stood with red-rimmed eyes, the very picture of distressed innocence. But the corner of her mouth held the faintest, most smug curl of triumph. "Of course I know," I said, my voice unnervingly calm as I stepped over the shards of porcelain. "It means my dear sister has found her true love. I couldn't be happier for her." My father blinked, his anger momentarily derailed by my placid response. "Happy? What about the Vances? What about our debt? This ruins everything." "There's no need to worry about that," I interrupted, reaching into my bag. I pulled out a crisp, legal-looking folder, a document I had spent the last few hours meticulously crafting with a lawyer whose loyalty I'd secured years ago, paid for with the last of my mother's secret funds. "I met with Eleanor Vance today. She has agreed that I will be the one to marry into their family. This is a new loan agreement. The Vances are granting us a 3-year extension." His hands trembled as he snatched the folder, his eyes scanning the fabricated terms. How is this possible?" Chloe's face paled. "Sister, I thought. I heard the Vances were furious about you and Alex." I turned a cool gaze upon her. "You're remarkably well informed about the internal sentiments of the Vance family. It's a pity your sources are so inaccurate." My father, now buoyed by a wave of relief, didn't seem to notice the venomous look Chloe shot me. "This is wonderful, Elara. You've always been the sensible one. There is one condition," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "The Vances require me to move into the estate starting tomorrow. To acclimatize." He frowned, the patriarch concerned with appearances. "Move in? Before the wedding? What will people say?" "What matters more, father?" I asked smoothly. "Gossip or the survival of Ward Holdings? Besides, Mrs. Vance has personally arranged for a series of etiquette and business management tutors. To outsiders, it will look as though the Vances are investing heavily in my preparation. It signals their serious commitment." He was sold instantly. Yes, of course. Whatever they require. You'll move in tomorrow." As I turned to go upstairs, Chloe stepped in front of me, blocking the staircase. Her pretense of tears was gone, replaced by a mask of pure spite. "What are you playing at, Elara?" she hissed, her voice low. I looked at her, this girl who had spent her life trying to steal my shadow. "Aren't you the clever one, Chloe? Then you tell me." I brushed past her, the weight of her furious gaze on my back feeling like a tangible thing. The next day I arrived at the Vance estate with 2 suitcases. They contained everything I truly valued, the rest was just props. Eleanor Vance wasted no time in establishing the rules of my new prison. She handed me a leather-bound notebook as thick as my arm. "From today you will adhere to this schedule. Every hour is accounted for. Meals, lessons, rest. And these," she tapped a section with a perfectly manicured finger, "are the protocols for Julian's care. The specific tone of voice to use, the approved topics of conversation." I opened it. It was a manifesto of control. 7 a.m. Assist with morning ablutions. Speak in a calming, subservient tone. Do not make direct eye contact unless spoken to. I closed the book with a soft thud. "Mrs. Vance," I said, meeting her steely gaze. "With all due respect, following these rules will only make him resist more." Her eyes widened imperceptibly. "And what, pray tell, would you know about it?" "Your son doesn't need to be treated like a piece of fractured porcelain," I said, my voice steady. "He needs to be spoken to like a man. A proud, intelligent man who has been dealt a terrible hand. Treating him like an invalid only confirms his own worst fears." Her expression shifted through several phases: shock, anger, and finally a grudging curiosity. "Fine," she said coldly. "I will give you 3 months. If there is no discernible improvement, you know the consequences." I nodded. In my heart, I knew it wouldn't take 3 months. The reflexive twitch in his leg when I'd inserted the needle told me his body was ready. It was his mind that was the prison. That night, I prepared a tray with a bowl of specially prepared medicinal soup and carried it to his room. I knocked. "Leave it." His voice, cold and flat, came from within. I pushed the door open anyway. He was by the window, a stack of company reports open on his lap, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of a tablet. He didn't look up. I said, "Put it down and get out." I didn't move. The efficacy of the herbs is best when the soup is hot. He finally lifted his gaze, his dark eyes shadowed and dangerous. "Elara Ward, do not mistake my acquiescence to this arrangement for permission to dictate my life. This isn't a dictation," I said, setting the tray aside and pulling the small lacquered box from my pocket. "It's part of your treatment." I opened it, revealing the array of fine silver needles. His expression shifted, a crack in the icy facade. "You actually believe those little pins can accomplish what a dozen specialists could not?" "It's not what I believe," I said calmly, moving closer. "It's what Dr. Aris proved. His technique for nerve regeneration is unparalleled. I only mastered 70 or 80% of it, but it will be enough for you." His fingers, resting on the wheelchair's arm, trembled almost imperceptibly. "Get out." Ignoring him, I knelt before him. He instinctively stiffened, his chin tilting up in defiance. In that moment, I quickly and precisely inserted a needle into a key acupoint on his thigh. A sharp intake of breath. His entire leg muscle tensed, a solid reactive knot beneath my fingers. But he didn't shove me away. "Do you feel that?" I asked softly. His throat worked as he swallowed. After a moment, he gave a terse, almost imperceptible nod. "Good." I continued, placing a few more needles with practiced efficiency. "Starting tonight, I will come every evening. Within a month, I guarantee you will be able to stand." He let out a cold, derisive laugh. "And what gives you such unshakable confidence?" "Because I know you can," I said, looking straight into the stormy depths of his eyes. "Julian, no one knows better than you that you were never truly broken. You've just been waiting for a reason to stand up." His pupils constricted violently. Suddenly his hand shot out and gripped my wrist, his grasp like iron. "Who told you that?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. I didn't flinch. I simply let my other hand rest gently on his knee over the needle. "When I inserted this, your reflex was perfect. Your body is ready. It's your will that is paralyzed." He stared at me, his eyes searching mine for a lie, a trick, anything but the unwavering truth he found there. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, his grip on my wrist loosened and fell away. "Leave," he said, his voice hoarse. I recognized the command for what it was now. A retreat, a surrender. I gathered my needles, stood and walked to the door. As my hand touched the handle, his voice stopped me. Tomorrow. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. A small, hard-won victory warmed the cold places inside me. The second move was his and he had taken it. Life in the Vance estate settled into a strange, tense rhythm. My days were a whirlwind. I followed Eleanor Vance, a silent shadow, learning the intricate web of social connections and business holdings that formed the Vance empire. I was a quick study, and I saw a flicker of reluctant respect in her eyes when I correctly identified a potential weakness in one of their subsidiary supply chains. But the true battle was fought in the evenings in Julian's room. Our sessions were a silent war of wills. He was a demanding, often infuriating patient, pushing himself to the point of collapse, his face beaded with sweat, his knuckles white on the arms of his chair. But he never once told me to stop. A tacit understanding grew between us in that quiet, medicine-scented room. He no longer greeted me with open hostility, and I never pried into the shadows that haunted his gaze. This fragile peace was shattered one afternoon a week later. I was in the sun-drenched tea room with Eleanor, discussing the guest list for a potential charity gala, when the head butler approached. "Miss Ward, there is a gentleman here to see you. A Mr. Alex Reed." Eleanor's cup clinked sharply against its saucer. Her face, which had been gradually softening toward me, iced over instantly. "Alex Reed," she said, her tone dripping with frost. "The childhood sweetheart who is now, inconveniently, your brother-in-law? Would you like me to see him, mother?" I asked, using the title for the first time. She was visibly taken aback, then gave a curt nod. "By all means. Let's see what the boy wants." Alex was shown in. He looked haggard, his usual polished charm replaced by a dark, agitated energy. Seeing Eleanor, he faltered, his confidence visibly wilting. "Mrs. Vance," he stammered, offering a slight bow. "My apologies for the intrusion." She took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Reed, to what do we owe this unexpected visit?" His eyes darted to me. "I need to speak with Alara. Alone." "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say in front of Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice light but firm. "We have no secrets." His face darkened. He drew a shaky breath. "Alara Chloe, she's in the hospital." I raised a single eyebrow, a gesture I had learned from Eleanor. "Oh, what seems to be the problem?" His fists clenched at his sides. "She's pregnant. But yesterday she started bleeding. The doctor said it's because she's been on birth control for too long, it caused a hormonal imbalance." He glared at me, accusation burning in his eyes. "She said you tampered with her pills, Alara. I know you hate us, but the baby is innocent." I almost laughed. In my past life, this was her opening gambit, the play that turned my father irrevocably against me. She was starting early. "She said I did it?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "She's devastated. She didn't want to accuse you, but the timing." The porcelain saucer in Eleanor's hand met the table with a sharp, definitive crack. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice low and cutting, "you dare come into my home and accuse my future daughter-in-law of a crime? Where's your proof? The medical report? The toxicology screen?" Alex blanched. "Chloe said." "What Chloe said is hearsay," I cut him off. "What matters is evidence. Do you have any?" He stood there, speechless, his plan unraveling before him. I sighed as if bored by the entire spectacle and pulled out my phone. I dialed Chloe's number and put it on speaker. The phone rang twice before her weak, trembling voice answered. "Hello. Chloe, it's Alara," I said, my tone businesslike. "Alex is here. He seems to be under the impression that you told him I tampered with your medication and caused your condition. Did you tell him that?" There was a dead silence on the other end. I could almost picture her in her hospital bed, frantically recalculating. Accusing me in private was one thing. Lying on a recorded line in front of Eleanor Vance was another. No, of course not. Her voice came, laced with a convincing tremor. "Alex must have misunderstood. I'm just so upset." "I see," I said, a faint, cold smile on my lips. "Then you should focus on resting. Julian and I will come to visit you soon." I maintained the facade of concerned sisters, preserving the family's public dignity for my own ends. I hung up and looked at Alex, whose face had turned a sickly shade of gray. Was there anything else? I asked. He stumbled back a step, the reality of his humiliation crashing down. Then, to my utter astonishment, he fell to his knees. Alara, I was wrong. She's been lying to me. Our company, the Reeds, are in trouble. We needed capital and I thought if I could turn the Van Cess against you. Get out, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Don't further embarrass yourself. He scrambled to his feet, a broken man, and was swiftly escorted out by the stony-faced butler. Eleanor was watching me, a new, appraising light in her eyes. You knew he would come. I know Chloe, I corrected softly. She loves to play the victim, but she's a coward at heart. She would never risk a direct, undeniable confrontation. Eleanor Vance, for the first time, gave me a genuine, albeit small, smile. Alara Ward. I am beginning to see why my son has allowed you to stay. Just then, the doors to the tea room opened and Julian wheeled himself in, his brow furrowed like a thundercloud. That sniveling worm dared to come here and slander you? It's been handled, I said, my voice softening despite myself. He snorted, a proud, dismissive sound. Then, with a grunt of effort, he pressed his hands down on the armrests of his wheelchair and, for a breathtaking 3 seconds, pushed himself to a standing position. His legs trembled violently and he collapsed back into the chair with a jarring thud, but the act itself was a seismic event. Eleanor let out a choked cry, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian. I'm fine, Mother, he said, his breath coming in short gasps, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, triumphant light. He turned that fiery gaze on me. But I won't allow anyone to think they can bully my future wife. The words "my future wife" hung in the air, a declaration that was both a shield and a promise. The game had just changed and I was no longer just a player on the board. I was becoming a piece he had decided to protect. The silence in the tea room after Julian's declaration was profound. Eleanor Vance stared at her son, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, her composure shattered by that fleeting, impossible moment of him standing. The air crackled with a new, unspoken understanding. Julian's defense of me was not about me at all, and yet it was everything. Julian, my son. Eleanor's voice was a tremulous whisper. I'm fine, Mother, he repeated, his voice rough but firm. His gaze, however, remained locked on me, a silent, challenging question in their depths. See what you've started? Eleanor, ever the pragmatist even in her shock, seemed to sense the shift. She dabbed her eyes delicately with a linen handkerchief. I should speak with the chef about dinner. Please excuse me. She left the room with uncharacteristic haste, leaving Julian and me alone in the sun-washed silence. I bowed my head slightly. Thank you, Julian. Whatever your reasons, what you just did will make my life here considerably easier. He frowned, his earlier fire cooling into his usual icy demeanor. Why are you so passive? You let your sister, your ex-lover, even your father walk all over you. If you can't handle the vermin, I will. Consider it repayment for the acupuncture. I almost smiled. Handle them? What does that entail exactly? The Vance family has a notorious reputation, but I wasn't aware it extended to illegal disposal. He shot me a glare that could freeze hell. I meant having them arrested. Embezzlement, fraud, defamation, their records are hardly clean. It would be a public service, ridding the city of such a distraction from my treatment. So he had investigated them. Thoroughly. A part of me, the part that remembered the cold water and the endless dark, thrilled at the idea. But the larger part, the part forged in that darkness, knew it wasn't enough. There's no need, I said, my voice quiet but steely. I will handle them myself. After being reborn, taking revenge with my own hands was the only thing that mattered. I already had a dossier compiled by my loyal lawyer, detailing my father's and Chloe's systematic looting of Ward holdings. I was merely waiting for the perfect moment to unleash it, letting them climb just a little higher so their fall would be that much more devastating. As for the Reed family, their financial foundation was already crumbling without the Grant Vance investment. They were a house of cards in a stiff breeze. Besides, I knew a far greater storm was brewing for Julian. The woman he truly hated, the architect of his despair, was about to return. I had no intention of getting in the way of his vengeance. He didn't press the issue, merely studying me with that unnerving intensity. If you can't manage it, then call me. We're partners now after all. It was a statement, not a question. All right, I conceded softly. In the days that followed, Julian's attitude toward his rehabilitation transformed. He became relentlessly driven, pushing past pain and exhaustion, demanding longer sessions, more difficult exercises. He was a man possessed, as if Alex's visit had lit a fuse inside him. Watching him grit his teeth, muscles quivering with strain, his skin slick with sweat, stirred something protective and fierce within me. My hands grew even steadier, my focus absolute. By my calculations, by the end of the third week he could shuffle a few steps along the wall, his weight supported by his arms, his legs trembling but obeying. The day he took those first unaided steps, a lurching, graceless movement from his wheelchair to the bed, Eleanor, who had taken to quietly observing our sessions, burst into tears. She didn't sob, she wept, silent, proud tears that carved paths through her perfectly applied makeup. She became effusive in her gratitude, showering me with diamond necklaces, transfers of staggering sums of money, and whispered promises of my future as the lady of the house. In a fit of joy, she even called her husband, Alistair Vance, who was overseeing their European interests, insisting he return to host a grand banquet to celebrate Julian's progress. But the moment Julian heard his father was bringing their foster daughter, Isabella, back with him, the light in his eyes died, replaced by the familiar, bottomless cold. "No," he said, his voice cutting through his mother's happy chatter. He snatched the phone from her hand. "Don't come back. Not now." He ended the call without another word. The air in the room went stale. I saw the flicker of fear in the eyes of a maid dusting a far cabinet. An informant, no doubt. Yet Julian had openly declared his hostility. To defuse the tension, I moved to his side and slipped my hand over his where it rested, white-knuckled on his wheelchair. He flinched but didn't pull away. "He just wants to wait until he's fully recovered," I said to a stunned Eleanor, my voice soothing and plausible. "He wants to surprise his father and Isabella. If they come back now, it will spoil it." I began to wheel him from the room, my touch firm. The moment we were in the hallway, out of sight, he shoved my hand away. "Who gave you the right to interfere?" he snarled, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "Did you think that little performance would earn you points with my mother?" I pulled my stinging hand back, my expression neutral. "I only didn't want your efforts to be wasted. All this progress, it would be a shame for it to be undermined by a confrontation you're not ready for." He gave a harsh, bitter laugh and spun his chair to face the tall window overlooking the night-shrouded gardens. "Isabella is coming back. Do you even know who she is?" "I do," I said evenly. "The girl your parents have sponsored for years. And the one responsible for the accident that paralyzed you." The wheelchair stopped dead. He turned slowly, his face a mask of icy fury. "You've been investigating me." "There was no need to investigate," I lied smoothly. "The scandal between her and your father is whispered about in every high society drawing room in the city. It's only that your mother, protected by your love for her, has chosen not to hear it. The truth, of course, was that in my past life after my death, I had watched from the shadows as Julian, finally standing tall, systematically destroyed Isabella and exposed her conspiracy with his father. I had seen the evidence, heard the confessions. But I couldn't tell him that. The room plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Julian's hands gripped the armrests so tightly the leather creaked in protest. After a long, tense minute, he let out a soft, chilling sound that was almost a laugh. "Elara Ward," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You chose to walk into this viper's nest. Don't expect to leave unscathed. If you're going to stand by my side, then you'll face the coming storm with me." I met his gaze, the storm in his eyes reflecting the one I knew was coming. "I expect nothing less." Alistair and Isabella returned earlier than anticipated. Eleanor, her eyes puffy and red, found me in the library 2 days later. Julian's strange behavior had finally pierced her willful blindness. Using her own considerable network, she had dug until she found the sordid truth. Her husband's long-standing affair with the seemingly innocent young woman they had taken in, the same woman who had orchestrated the near-fatal accident that had crippled their son. But years of being sidelined from the core of Vance Corporation had left her powerless. The business empire was Alistair's domain, and she was now just the decorative wife. "Elara," she whispered, clutching my arm, her desperation a tangible force. "You must take Julian away. Go to the seaside villa. Tell them it's for his recovery. A quiet environment. I looked at her, this proud woman brought low by betrayal. What about you, mother? She shook her head, her chin trembling. It doesn't matter. Just keep him safe. Before I could answer, the doors swung open and Julian propelled himself into the room, his face a thundercloud. I am not running. Julian, please. Just because I've been sitting in this chair for 7 years, he interrupted, his voice cold and sharp as a scalpel, does not mean I've been idle. His words froze his mother in place. Tears began to stream down her face, silent and hopeless. He wheeled closer and took her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. I am not that helpless boy anymore, mother. He then lifted his head, his burning gaze finding mine. Elara. Take me to the study. Inside the oak-paneled study, a room that smelled of old books and power, he unlocked a hidden safe behind a painting. He pulled out a thick file folder and dropped it on the desk with a definitive thud. This is what I've spent the last 7 years compiling, he said, his finger tapping the cover. The accident was Isabella's doing. He tampered with my car's brakes. And she did it under my father's orders. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat. No. Alistair would never. Why? He's wanted to replace me as his heir for a long time, Julian said, his voice dripping with contempt. Isabella isn't just his mistress. She bore him a son. A legitimate heir to replace the broken one. I watched as the last vestiges of Eleanor Vance's world crumbled to dust. She sank onto a leather Chesterfield sofa, her face as white as the paper in the folder. Mother, Julian's voice softened, becoming strategic, commanding. I need your help now. Can you contact your brother? Understanding dawned in her tear-filled eyes. Her brother was a titan of venture capital, the one man whose influence could counter Alistair's. A new strength straightened her spine. Wiping her tears with a furious dignity, she nodded. I'll call him immediately. The day Alistair Vance returned, the very air in the mansion grew thick and difficult to breathe. He walked in with Isabella on his arm. She was dressed in a virginal white dress, her smile sweet, her eyes demurely downcast. But when her gaze swept over Julian in his wheelchair, I saw it, a fleeting, gloating triumph. Julian, Alistair said, his voice laden with a fatherly concern that rang utterly false. Your mother tells me you're making progress. Don't overexert yourself. Julian offered a thin, cold smile. I'm not exerting myself at all, father. In fact, I can already stand. Before the stunned eyes of everyone in the grand foyer, he placed his hands on the armrests and, with a visible, grinding effort, pushed himself upright. His body swayed, his legs shook violently, but he held the position for a full 5 seconds, a statue of defiance and pain before collapsing back into the chair. Isabella's face went slack with shock. Impossible, she breathed. The doctor said a lot of things. I cut in, stepping forward to stand beside Julian's chair. But they underestimated his will. Alistair's eyes, sharp and calculating, narrowed on me. And you are? Elara Ward, I said, my voice clear and steady in the cavernous room. His fiancée. And the one who helped him stand. Julian reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and possessive. Isabella's gaze dropped to our joined hands, and the jealousy that flashed in her eyes was so pure and hot it was almost a physical force. That evening, at a dinner so tense the fine china seemed to vibrate, Alistair made his move. Next month, he announced as if bestowing a great honor, is Isabella's birthday. I will be appointing her to the board of Vance Corporation. Eleanor's knuckles were white as she gripped her fork, but she said nothing. She had learned to wait. I object, Julian said, his tone conversational. Alistair's smile was condescending. You are in no position to object. No. Julian pulled his phone from his pocket. With a tap, the room was filled with the clear, unmistakable voices of Alistair and Isabella, plotting the accident, discussing the need to remove the obstacle of the heir. Isabella shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the marble floor. It's a fake. A forgery. At that precise moment, the butler rushed in, his composure gone. Sir. The police. There are police cars outside. Julian's uncle had not been idle. Armed with the evidence Julian provided, and fueled by a long-simmering hatred for the man who had caused his sister and nephew so much pain, He had moved swiftly. The aftermath was a controlled chaos. Alistair and Isabella were read their rights and led away, their shouts of protest echoing through the halls before being silenced by the closing car doors. In the sudden ringing silence of the mansion, Eleanor Vance straightened her shoulders, the grieving wife replaced by the steel magnolia. She began issuing calm, efficient orders to the staff, steadying the ship. Julian looked at me, the storm in his eyes finally quieting into something resembling peace. It's done. The word hung between us. His war was over. The reason for our transaction was swiftly becoming obsolete. He could stand. His enemies were vanquished. My protection was no longer needed. I had my own war to fight. It was time to go home. The silence after Alistair and Isabella were taken away was more deafening than any accusation or shattered vase. It was the silence of a fortress that had repelled its invaders, leaving behind only the hollow echo of victory. Eleanor, her face a pale mask of grim resolve, immediately began the work of stabilizing the household, her voice a low, steady command in the stunned quiet. Julian remained in his wheelchair in the center of the foyer, his posture rigid, but the usual tension that corded his neck and shoulders was gone. He had uncoiled. His war was over. He looked at me, his gaze clear and direct for the first time since I'd known him. It's done, he said. The words were simple, final. They were a declaration of his freedom, and an unspoken expiration date on our arrangement. The transaction was nearing its end. He could stand. His enemies were being processed by the justice system. The shield of the Vance name which I had leased was no longer a desperate necessity for him. A strange emptiness opened inside me, a quiet hollow where my purpose had been. I had achieved what I set out to do here. It was time to turn my attention to my own battlefield. I should go, I said softly, more to myself than to him. Back to the ward house. There are matters I need to attend to. Julian's brow furrowed. Go? Why? The question seemed so absurd I almost laughed. Our deal, Julian. I help you stand. You give me protection. You're standing. Your position here is secure. The debt is paid. His frown deepened. My rehabilitation isn't complete. I can hold myself up for a few seconds. I can't walk. I can't run a corporation from this chair. He gestured dismissively at the wheelchair. The deal isn't over. It was a flimsy excuse and we both knew it. With the psychological barrier of his father and Isabella removed, his physical progress would now be a matter of weeks, not months. He didn't need me for that. Any competent physical therapist could take over. But I saw the stubborn set of his jaw. He wasn't ready to let me go. Whether it was out of habit, a lingering sense of obligation, or something else I couldn't tell. Very well, I conceded, not in the mood for a fight. But my family matters won't wait forever. Life in the Vance estate entered a new, uncertain phase. With Alistair gone, Eleanor stepped into the void at the heart of Vance Corporation with a ferocity I hadn't known she possessed. She spent her days on the phone, in meetings held in the study, her voice a calm, steely force pacifying shareholders and reassuring partners. She was reclaiming her son's kingdom, and she was doing it with the cold efficiency of a queen regent. Julian, freed from the shadow that had crippled him, threw himself into his recovery with a terrifying, single-minded focus. Our evening sessions became more intense, more demanding. He no longer tolerated the wheelchair, insisting on using walkers, parallel bars, anything that forced his legs to bear weight. He would push until his muscles screamed and sweat soaked through his clothes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Often. The sound of his body hitting the floor was a jarring, sickening thud that never failed to make me flinch. But he always gritted his teeth, gripped the bars, and hauled himself back up. Again, he'd grunt, his eyes blazing with a fire that was both awe-inspiring and frightening. I was his spotter, his taskmaster, his silent witness. I said nothing when he fell, offering only a steadying hand when he needed it, my own hands growing strong and sure from catching his weight. A strange, wordless partnership solidified between us in that room, built on shared pain and a mutual, ruthless determination. One afternoon, about a week after the arrests, I was reviewing Vance corporate structure charts with Eleanor. She had begun including me in these sessions, a tacit acknowledgement of my new status, when my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Eleanor glanced up from a financial report. You should take that, Alara. It might be important. Excusing myself, I stepped into the hallway. The screen showed my father's name. A cold dread, entirely separate from fear, trickled down my spine. I answered, Alara. His voice was a panicked shriek, stripped of all its usual pomposity. You need to come home. No. The company, it's all falling apart. I leaned against the cool wall, my heart a steady, cold drum in my chest. So it had begun. What's happened, father? The financials. The discrepancies. Someone leaked them to the board. The stock is in free fall. The banks are calling in their loans. He was practically sobbing. Alara, only you can save us now. The Vances. If you just ask them for a bridge loan just to stabilize. I won't ask, I said, my voice flat and final. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then the phone was fumbled and Chloe's voice, sharp with venomous hysteria, came down the line. You think you're so safe hiding behind Julian Vance? You think you've won? Alex is already meeting with him. He's offering a partnership. When the Reeds and the Vances join forces, you'll be nothing. You'll be thrown back into the gutter where you belong. I ended the call without another word. The hollow inside me filled with a cold, clear purpose. So Alex was making his move. He was more desperate and more foolish than I had thought. I went straight to Julian's study. He was in a video conference, his back to the door, his voice a low, authoritative rumble as he discussed asset liquidation. He saw my reflection in the dark screen of a monitor and held up a hand, cutting off the person on the other end. We'll reconvene in an hour, he said, and ended the call. He turned his chair to face me. What is it? Alex Reed is going to approach you for a partnership, I said without preamble. Don't agree to it. Julian leaned back, steepling his fingers. His expression was unreadable, the face of a businessman, not my rehabilitation partner. The terms he's floated through back channels are very tempting. The Reed family has a promising new energy project. The potential ROI is significant. In business, one must consider profit. I understood. He was the new, untested head of a shaken empire. He needed a win, a profitable project to cement his authority with the board of directors. My personal vendetta was not his concern. That was exactly why I had come prepared. I pulled out my phone and navigated to a file. I know you have to consider profit, but you also have to consider risk. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, recorded from my past life, a conversation I had overheard the day before I died. Chloe's voice, smug and gloating, and Alex's, eager and avaricious. Once the partnership is signed, Chloe was saying, we use their capital to fund the project, then funnel the profits through our offshore accounts. We'll bleed the Vances dry. Julian's so desperate for a success, he'll agree to anything. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. He'll be ruined and will be the new power in this city. And Alara? Alex asked. She'll be discarded. A used-up pawn. Without the Vances, she's nothing. I stopped the recording. The silence in the study was absolute. Julian's face was a carefully controlled blank, but his eyes had turned to chips of black ice. Where did you get that? That doesn't matter, I said, putting the phone away. What matters is that you now know their true intention. It's not a partnership. It's a Trojan horse. He studied me for a long, long moment, his gaze seeming to strip away all my layers, all my defenses. Alara Ward, he said, his voice quiet. You didn't need to bring me this. I never had any intention of working with them. The admission startled me. Then why? Because their enemy is your enemy, he interrupted, his voice gaining a strange intensity. And if they are your enemy, then they are mine. Can't you trust me just a little? The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Trust. It was a currency I had stopped dealing in a long time ago. I gave a slight, hesitant nod. But when the day came that Alex was officially granted an audience, I still couldn't bring myself to stay away. I hid in the adjoining sitting room, the door left open a crack, my body tense. Alex looked like a man on the edge, his suit a little too sharp, his smile a little too wide. Mr. Vance, he began, laying out a glossy proposal on Julian's desk. Our new energy project is a game changer. The market potential is enormous. With Vance Corporation's backing, the return on investment could be 300%, maybe more. Julian flipped through the pages with a detached air. It looks impressive on paper. But why come to me? Why now? Alex leaned forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. Because of your resources. And well, because of Alara. He said my name like a dirty secret. I know the two of you are only in a transactional relationship. A marriage of convenience. Once this deal is successful, I can help you extricate yourself from that situation. She's too headstrong, too cold. Not a real woman, not like Chloe. Being tied to her must be a burden. Before he could utter another word, Julian's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as a whip crack. Mr. Reed, it seems you are laboring under several significant misapprehensions. He stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up from the wheelchair and stood on his own 2 feet, leaning only slightly on the desk for balance. He towered over a seated Alex, his presence suddenly dominating the room. First, Julian said, his voice dripping with contempt, Alara Ward is my fiancée. Not a transaction. Second, your project is a fraudulent house of cards. I have all the evidence I need right here. He tapped a folder on his desk that I hadn't noticed before. Alex's face went from smug to ashen in a heartbeat. That's impossible. Julian pressed a button on his desk. The study door opened and 2 uniformed police officers walked in. Mr. Reed, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit commercial fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As Alex was read his rights, his stunned, terrified gaze caught mine through the crack in the door. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply watched, the cold emptiness inside me finally filling with a sense of closure. When they were gone, I stepped out of the sitting room. Julian was still standing, his knuckles white where he gripped the desk, his body trembling with the effort. His eyes met mine. Satisfied. I nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. He took a careful shuffling step toward me. But in return, can you finally answer a question for me? Where did that recording really come from? The moment I had dreaded and perversely longed for. I drew a deep, shaky breath. The lies were too heavy to carry anymore. If I told you I've already lived this life once, that I was reborn after dying a tragic death, would you believe me? I expected disbelief, derision, perhaps pity. Said he nodded. A simple, unequivocal nod. I would. My breath caught. Why? Because I once had a dream, he said softly, his gaze distant, haunted. A very long, very vivid dream. In it you died. Horribly. And I was consumed by a regret so profound it felt like a physical illness. Regret for not seeing you, for not protecting you, for not realizing what you were to me until it was far, far too late. My body went rigid. The world tilted on its axis. In that dream, he continued, his voice a low murmur, Chloe came to me with the news. She wept and spun her web of lies. When I investigated, I found the truth. But you were already gone. So when you appeared in my house with your steady hands and your fearless eyes, I knew you. I had been chasing your ghost in my dreams for what felt like an eternity. Tears I didn't know I still possessed welled in my eyes, blurring his face. So it wasn't just me. He remembered. In some fractured, dreamlike way, he remembered the pain of my first life too. Alara Ward, he said, taking another stumbling step forward, closing the distance between us. His hand came up, his fingers gently brushing a stray tear from my cheek. Will you give me a chance? A real one? Let me court you. Let me stand beside you. Let me spend the rest of this life making up for the one I failed to save you in. It was too much. The confession, the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the echo of a shared, painful past. My carefully constructed walls crumbled into dust. You can court me, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. But a marriage proposal, that will have to wait. A real, genuine smile, the first I had ever seen, transformed his face. It stripped away the bitterness, the anger, the pain, and revealed the man he might have been, the man he could still be. Then a courtship it is. He pulled me into his arms, and this time my heart didn't just waver. It soared. The world had shifted on its axis. Julian's confession, that he remembered in dreams the ghost of my first life, unlocked something inside me. The cold, strategic part of my mind warned that it changed nothing, that my revenge was still my own to take. But the lonely, wounded girl I had been for 2 lifetimes felt a crack in her isolation. I was no longer alone in my knowledge of the past. Our dynamic transformed. The nightly rehabilitation sessions were no longer a transaction but a shared goal. When he fell, my hands were there not just to catch him but to soothe. When he pushed himself too hard, my admonishments were laced with a concern that was no longer clinical. He in turn began to talk. Not about his father or Isabella but about small things. A book he was reading. A memory of his mother before the world turned sour. The weight in the room began to lift, replaced by a tentative, fragile warmth. It was in this newfound peace that the final act of my own personal drama began to crash down. The call came in the dead of night, the phone's shrill ring tearing through the silence of my guest room in the Vance estate. It was my father. His voice was a ragged, broken thing, stripped of all its former bluster. "Alara, you have to come home. No. It's over. It's all over." I sat up in bed, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. I felt nothing but a cold, clear calm. "What's over, father?" "The company," he wailed. "The financial fraud, it's been exposed. Completely. The stock has plummeted to zero. The banks have foreclosed, the board is filing for bankruptcy, and the police are involved." I could hear Chloe shrieking in the background, a sound of pure, undiluted panic. "I see," I said, my voice flat. "Alara, you have to help me," he begged, his voice trembling with tears. "You're my daughter. You're a Vance now. Just ask them for the money. A loan, an investment, anything. They can save us." "No," I said. The word was simple, absolute. There was a stunned silence, followed by a scuffling sound. Then Chloe was on the line, her voice a venomous screech. "You selfish bitch. You think you're safe in your ivory tower? You think you've won? We'll drag you down with us. I'll tell everyone you were in on it. You'll do nothing, Chloe," I interrupted, my tone bored. "Because you have no power here. Enjoy the consequences of your actions." I hung up. The silence that returned was sweeter than any symphony. I didn't go back to sleep. I simply watched the moon trace its path across the sky, waiting for dawn. When the sun rose, I dressed in a simple, severe black dress, the sartorial equivalent of a weapon. Julian was already in the breakfast room reading a financial tablet. He looked up as I entered, his eyes taking in my attire, the grim resolve on my face. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply nodded, folded his tablet and rose to his feet. He still used a cane but his steps were firm. "Sure. I'll come with you. This is something I need to do alone, Julian." "I'm not going to stop you," he said, his gaze steady. "I'm going to stand behind you. There's a difference." The Ward mansion when we arrived was a scene of utter chaos. Reporters jostled on the lawn, held back by a single harried police line. Through the large windows I could see figures moving quickly, carrying boxes, forensic accountants seizing evidence. We entered through a side door, avoiding the media circus. The grand foyer, once a symbol of my father's fleeting power, was now just a hollow, echoing space. My father stood in the center of it, looking shrunken and old, his hair a shocking white. Chloe was weeping hysterically on the bottom step of the staircase. When my father saw me, a flicker of pathetic hope lit his eyes. When he saw Julian standing solidly behind me, that hope blazed into a desperate inferno. "Alara. Thank God." He stumbled toward me, arms outstretched. "You've come. You can fix this." I took a step back, avoiding his touch. "There's nothing to fix, Father. The rot has reached the foundation. It's time to tear it down." His face crumpled. "How can you say that? I'm your father." "Are you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Do you remember how my mother died, Charles?" The use of his first name shocked him into silence. Chloe's sobs hiccuped to a stop. "She didn't just die of her illness, did she?" I continued, taking a step closer, my eyes locked on his. "She died because you went into her room one night and you pulled the plug on her ventilator." Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Father, is that true?" My father's face went slack with terror. He looked from me to Chloe, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. How could you know that?" he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "Because I saw the security footage," I said, the memory a fresh wound even now. "The camera in the hallway. I came to visit her that night just after you'd left. She was already gone." My voice shook but I forced the words out. "You did it to access her trust fund, the one that was meant for me. You did it because you were drowning in debt and you saw your paralyzed wife as a financial drain." The truth, spoken aloud in the cavernous room, was more devastating than any accusation. My father collapsed to his knees, a broken man confessing without words. "You monster," Chloe whispered, staring at him with genuine horror. But my father's despair quickly curdled into a final, spiteful rage. He looked up at me, his face twisted into a grotesque mask. "You think you've won, Alara? Let me tell you something. The debt. The entire company's debt. I transferred it into your name. If I go down, you're coming with me. You'll be buried in this." Before I could respond, Julian's voice cut through the air, cold and authoritative. "That fraudulent debt transfer contract was nullified by my lawyers 3 weeks ago. It holds no legal weight. You have nothing." The final prop was kicked out from under him. My father stared at Julian, then back at me, the last of his fight draining away, leaving only a hollow, broken shell. At that moment, 2 police officers entered the foyer. "Charles Ward? Chloe Ward? You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Lillian Ward, and for multiple counts of financial fraud and embezzlement." As they were read their rights and handcuffed, my father didn't look at me again. He had nothing left. Chloe, however, shot me a look of pure, undying hatred as she was led away. It was a look I returned with a calm, final indifference. They were ghosts to me now. The silence they left behind was absolute. I stood in the center of the foyer, surrounded by the ruins of my past life. The revenge I had craved for so long was complete. It tasted of ashes. I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Julian." He didn't say anything. He just stood there, a solid, warm presence at my back, his silence a greater comfort than any words could have been. In the following days, Ward Holdings was officially declared bankrupt. The assets were liquidated. But the personal fortune my mother had left me, the one I had secretly moved and protected years ago, remained untouched. I was not the heiress to a crumbled empire, but I was free. Free of the name, free of the debt, free of the ghost. A week after the arrests, I found myself standing in the garden of the Vance estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The battle was over. My reason for being here was gone. Julian found me there. He walked up beside me, his cane tapping softly on the stone path. He was getting stronger every day. "It's over," I said, echoing his words from weeks before. "Is it?" he asked. I turned to look at him. "My father and Chloe are in prison. The company is gone. My debt to you is paid. There's no more reason for me to stay. Isn't there?" He leaned on his cane, his gaze intense. "What about the courtship?" A small, sad smile touched my lips. "Julian, that was a fantasy born of a shared nightmare. You don't owe me anything." "I'm not talking about owing," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I'm talking about wanting. Alara, I don't want you to leave." The directness of his words struck me silent. "I know you need to find out who you are without all this weight," he continued. "So, go." I blinked, surprised. "Go. Take a trip. See the world. Breathe. But don't vanish on me." He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm. "The company is stable. My mother has everything under control. But if you disappear, I'll lose you for real this time, and that is the one thing I know in both my waking life and my dreams, that I cannot survive." Tears pricked my eyes again. This man, who had been broken in so many ways, was offering me my freedom while asking me to stay. "I was thinking of Iceland," I whispered, my voice thick. "In my last life, I always wanted to see the northern lights. I never got the chance." He smiled then, a true radiant smile that reached his eyes. "Then let's go to Iceland." "Our courtship has to be in Iceland?" I asked, a genuine laugh bubbling up despite my tears. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "Our courtship can be wherever you want it to be. But our honeymoon definitely has to be in Iceland." He released me just enough to reach into his pocket. He pulled out a small black velvet box. My heart stopped. He didn't get down on one knee, his leg wouldn't allow it yet, but he held the box out to me, his eyes full of a hope so vulnerable it stole my breath. "Alara Ward," he said, his voice clear and sure. "You brought me back to life. Marry me. Not for a deal, not for protection, but for us. Let's turn this trip into the beginning of our life together." I looked at the box, at the man holding it, at the future shining in his eyes. The cold, strategic part of my mind was finally, completely silent. The lonely girl from 2 lifetimes ago was finally, completely home. I took the box and opened it. Inside wasn't a cold, perfect diamond, but a unique, fiery opal, its colors shifting in the dying light, like the aurora I had always dreamed of seeing. Yes, I said, the word, a vow, a promise, a release. Yes, Julian. I'll marry you. He let out a breath I didn't know he'd been holding and pulled me into a kiss that tasted of sunset, of forgiveness, and of a future I had never dared to dream of. The opal on my finger was a captured piece of the sky, its colors shifting from deep ocean blue to fiery emerald with every movement of my hand. It was not the cold, perfect diamond society would have expected, and that was why it was perfect. It was alive, unpredictable, and uniquely mine. Just like the man who had given it to me. The week after the proposal was a whirlwind of quiet, private joy. Eleanor, upon hearing the news, had wept again, but this time they were tears of unadulterated happiness. She immediately began sketching plans for a modest wedding that, by Vance standards, would likely require the rental of a small European nation. Julian and I let her dream. We had our own plans. We left for Iceland on a crisp, clear morning. There was no fanfare, no entourage. Just the two of us, a pilot and a co-pilot on the Vance private jet. Julian's cane was a constant companion, but he navigated the steps and the aisle with a grim determination that was becoming familiar. This was his first real test in the outside world, and he was treating it with the focus of a military campaign. The flight was a revelation. For the first time since my rebirth, I felt the heavy cloak of my past truly begin to slip from my shoulders. I wasn't Alara Ward, the betrayed daughter, the avenging angel. I was just a woman looking out a window at endless banks of clouds, sitting next to a man who knew the worst of her and had chosen to stay. He worked for part of the flight, his tablet glowing on his lap, but his presence was different. The frantic, desperate energy that had driven him was gone, replaced by a calm, steady purpose. Occasionally, his hand would find mine, his thumb stroking absently over the opal, as if to reassure himself it was still there. We landed in Reykjavik, where the air was so clean and cold it felt like washing the city's grime from my lungs. We rented a rugged, modified 4x4 and Julian, to my surprise and secret delight, insisted on driving. It was slow, careful work, his movements deliberate as he adjusted to the unfamiliar pedals, but he did it. He was reclaiming his life, piece by piece. We didn't stay in the city. We drove east towards the wilder, more remote landscapes, following a route I had meticulously planned in my first life, a dream trip for a girl who never got to take it. Our destination was a secluded, glass-roofed cabin nestled in a black sand valley, far from the light pollution of any town. The first 2 days were a lesson in quiet coexistence. We hiked short, accessible trails, his cane sinking into the mossy earth. We sat in natural hot springs, the steam rising around our faces in the frigid air, the silence between us comfortable and deep. We talked about books, about art, about stupid, inconsequential things. We didn't talk about my father or Chloe or his. It was as if we had signed an unspoken pact to leave our ghosts at the border. But on the third night the ghosts came anyway. We were sitting on the plush rug in front of the cabin's massive fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the glass ceiling. The forecast had predicted a high chance of auroral activity. The night was utterly black and clear, the air so still you could hear the distant crackle of the ice. "I never asked," Julian said, his voice a soft rumble in the quiet. "In your first life. How did it happen?" The question hung in the air, as stark and unavoidable as the landscape outside. I had known it would come. I stared into the flames, the memory washing over me not with its usual debilitating pain, but with a strange, detached clarity. "It was after the engagement was broken," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "The Vances were insulted. They doubled the debt. My father, he lost his mind. He blamed me for everything. He said I was a failure, a disgrace, that I had destroyed the family." I felt Julian's body go rigid beside me, but he didn't interrupt. I had nothing left. No hope, no allies, no future. I felt like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I took a shaky breath. I went to the ward building, to the penthouse office. And I jumped. The words, spoken aloud, were chilling in their simplicity. I had never said them to anyone. A sharp, pained sound escaped Julian's throat. In the firelight I saw his face was a mask of anguish. "I felt it," he whispered, his voice raw. In the dream. I didn't know how or why, but I felt this devastating emptiness. This loss. It woke me up and I couldn't breathe. He turned to me, his eyes blazing with a ferocious intensity. I would have torn the world apart for you. If I had known then what I know now, I would have burned it all to the ground to find you. The conviction in his voice was a physical force. It wasn't just guilt or regret. It was a possessive, furious love that spanned 2 lifetimes. I know, I said softly, reaching for his hand. That's why you sent the money, isn't it? After I was gone. You cleared the war debt. You gave Chloe a massive settlement. He nodded, his jaw tight. Guilt. A misplaced sense of responsibility. I thought if I fixed the financial ruin I could fix the hole your death left in the world. I didn't know she was the architect of your despair. I didn't know anything. I was just a broken man in a chair, trying to atone for a sin I didn't understand. We sat in silence for a long time, the crackle of the fire the only sound. The shared confession had opened a deep old wound, but it felt like a lancing. The poison was finally draining out. It was then that a faint green glow began to shimmer at the edge of the northern horizon. We both saw it at the same time. The heavy past receded, forgotten. Julian pushed himself up and I stood with him, helping him to his feet. We walked to the large glass wall, our hands tightly clasped. The glow intensified, morphing from a faint whisper into a swirling, ethereal river of light. It danced across the black velvet of the sky, ribbons of emerald and violet twisting and curling in a silent cosmic ballet. It was more magnificent than any picture, any dream. It was alive. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of awe, of release, of a promise fulfilled across the boundary of death itself. Julian's arm came around me, pulling me close against his side. He was warm and solid, his breathing steady. He didn't speak. He just held me as we watched the heavens perform their ancient, glorious dance. After a long while, when the lights began to fade, he turned to me. His face, illuminated by the lingering ghost of the aurora, was filled with a love so profound it made my heart ache. This isn't just a courtship, Alara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And this isn't a honeymoon. Not yet. This is a beginning. Our beginning. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of cold night air and infinite possibilities. In that moment, under the fading celestial lights, the last of my ghosts finally, peacefully let me go. The girl who had jumped from a penthouse was gone. The woman who stood in her place was whole, loved, and finally free. The end. We returned from Iceland different people. The Arctic air had scoured us clean. Julian walked with more confidence, the cane and aid now, not a crutch. The shadows in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady light. And I felt light. The opal on my finger was no longer just a promise. It was an anchor, tethering me to a future I was no longer afraid to claim. Eleanor met us at the airport, her embrace fierce and prolonged. The Vance estate, once a gilded cage, now felt like a sanctuary. It was home. Julian dove back into the work of solidifying his control over Vance Corporation, but the frantic edge was gone. He worked with the calm authority of a man who had reclaimed not just a company but his own soul. I too found my purpose. With Eleanor's eager guidance, I began to formally involve myself in the Vance Philanthropic Foundation. It was work that felt meaningful, a way to use the vast resources of this family to mend tears in the world, rather than create them. I was no longer the strategic daughter-in-law. I was being groomed as a partner, a future co-steward of the Vance legacy. For 3 months we built this new life. It was a time of quiet, profound happiness. We fell into a comfortable rhythm of work and quiet evenings, of shared laughter and soft touches. The past was a closed book. And then the storm hit. It began with a phone call. Not to me or to Julian but to Eleanor. I was in the library reviewing grant proposals, when I heard her sharp, distressed cry from the study. I found her clutching the phone, her face ashen. "What is it?" I asked, my own heart seizing. She hung up, her hand trembling. "It's the lawyer. Alistair, he's had a heart attack. In prison. It's not fatal but it's serious. He's been transferred to the hospital wing." The name Alistair was a ghost we had all tried to bury. Julian walked in then, having heard the commotion. He froze in the doorway, his face hardening into that old, familiar mask of ice. "What about him?" he asked, his voice dangerously flat. "He's asking to see you, Julian," Eleanor whispered, her eyes pleading. "He says it's urgent. That he has to apologize." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Julian's lips. "Apologize? No. When he's facing a life behind bars and a failing heart, he suddenly finds his conscience. It's a ploy. A final, pathetic attempt to manipulate us." "He's still your father," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "No," Julian corrected, his voice like shattering glass. "The man who was my father died the day he ordered Isabella to sabotage my car. The creature in that prison hospital is a stranger." He turned and walked out, the tap of his cane echoing with finality down the hall. I thought that was the end of it. But the calls kept coming. From the lawyer, from a prison chaplain, all relaying the same message. Alistair Vance was desperate to see his son. The pressure was wearing on Eleanor, the conflict between her residual loyalty to the man she'd once loved and her fierce protectiveness of her son tearing her apart. The storm inside Julian was worse. The calm he had fought so hard to achieve evaporated. He became withdrawn, irritable. He stopped his physical therapy. He spent hours locked in his study, and when he emerged, his eyes were haunted again. The ghost of his father was threatening to pull him back into the abyss. One night, I found him standing on the balcony off our bedroom, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles were bone white, staring out into the darkness as a cold rain began to fall. "He doesn't deserve a single second of my time," he said, not turning around. His voice was raw. "He forfeited that right." "I know," I said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one being punished?" he asked, the question a tormented whisper. "Why can't I just let it go?" I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the tension thrumming through him. "Because you're not like him, Julian. You have a conscience, and he knows it. That's his final weapon." He was silent for a long time, the rain soaking through our clothes. "What should I do, Ilara?" The question was stripped bare, the plea of a lost boy. I didn't have an answer. This was his battle, his demon. All I could do was stand with him. "Whatever you decide," I said, taking his cold hand in mine, "I will be here. If you go, I go with you. If you never go, I will never mention his name again. The choice is yours, and I will stand by it." He turned then, his wet hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes searching mine in the gloom. He saw the unwavering certainty there. My loyalty was not conditional. It was not based on his decisions but on him. The next morning he was gone before I woke. A note on his pillow written in his sharp, decisive script said only, "Don't wait up. I have something I need to face." My heart hammered against my ribs. He had gone. The day stretched, interminable and heavy. Eleanor paced. I tried to work, but the words on the page blurred into nonsense. Every tick of the clock was an agony. Was he being hurt? Was his father spewing more poison? Was this the thing that would break him for good? It was late afternoon when I heard the front door open. I rushed to the top of the stairs. Julian stood in the foyer, dripping wet from the renewed rain, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes were clear. The storm was gone. He looked up and saw me. Without a word, he began to climb the stairs. Slowly, deliberately, leaving a trail of rainwater on the marble. He didn't use the cane. He gripped the banister, his legs carrying him step by determined step until he stood before me. He smelled of rain and antiseptic and prison. "Well?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He apologized," Julian said, his tone strangely neutral. "It was real. He's a broken, sick old man, and he's terrified of dying alone in a cell. He told me everything. Not just about the accident, but about the years of resentment, the jealousy he felt toward me, his own son. He cried. It was pathetic. He reached out and cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. And I stood there and I listened. And I felt nothing. No rage. No hatred. Not even pity. Just a vast, empty silence. I told him I heard his apology. And then I told him I would never forgive him. And I walked out. The breath I didn't know I'd been holding rushed out of me. He hadn't offered absolution. He hadn't granted the old man the peace he sought. He had simply taken his power back. "Are you okay?" I asked. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first I'd seen in days. It was a tired smile, but it was free. I am now. Because I finally understand. I've been carrying his ghost on my back for years, thinking I had to either forgive him or let the hatred consume me. But there's a third option. You can just let them go. You can leave them in the past where they belong. He pulled me into a tight, damp embrace, burying his face in my hair. You were my anchor, Alara. Knowing you were here, that you would be here no matter what, was the only thing that gave me the strength to walk into that room. And you are the only reason I was able to walk out. We stood there, clinging to each other on the landing as the storm outside finally began to abate. He had faced his greatest demon and had not been found wanting. The last chain that bound him to his old life had been shattered. That night, as we lay in bed, listening to the gentle patter of the dying rain, he turned to me. The wedding, he said. Let's not wait. I don't want a spectacle. I don't want to wait for my legs to be perfect or for the perfect season. I just want you as my wife. Now. I rolled over to face him, the opal glowing faintly in the moonlight. Where? I asked, a smile playing on my lips. He grinned, a boyish, mischievous grin I had never seen before. Where else? Iceland. We were married 2 weeks later in a small wooden chapel perched on a black sand beach in Vik, Iceland. The wind, a constant gentle force, whistled a hymn through the eaves. The only guests were Eleanor, Julian's uncle, and the stern-faced, kind-eyed local pastor. I wore a simple, heavy ivory wool dress, and Julian stood beside me at the altar, his posture straight and sure, his cane resting against the pew behind him. He didn't need it to make his vows. His voice was clear and steady as he promised to love, comfort, honor, and keep me in sickness and in health. When it was my turn, I looked into his eyes, those deep, frozen lakes that had once terrified me and now felt like home. I, Alara, take you, Julian, to be my husband. I will love and cherish you for all the days of my life, and in whatever may come after. The words were a seal, a final locking away of the past. He didn't kiss me when the pastor said he could. Instead, he leaned his forehead against mine, his hands cradling my face, and we stood like that for a long moment, breathing each other in, two shattered people made whole in the joining. I love you, Alara Vance, he whispered, the name a promise on his lips. Our reception was a dinner of fresh-caught fish and roasted vegetables in a cozy, fire-lit restaurant overlooking the stormy North Atlantic. Eleanor, her eyes shining with a peace I'd never seen in her, squeezed my hand. You brought my son back to me, she murmured. You brought him back to himself. Later, wrapped in furs on a cliffside bench, we watched the sky. It was too cloudy for the northern lights, but it didn't matter. The spectacle was inside us. I have a wedding gift for you, Julian said, his arm tight around me. You've already given me a new life, I said, leaning into his warmth. This is different. He pulled an envelope from his coat. It was legal-sized, thick with paper. It's not from me, technically. It's from you. Puzzled, I opened it. Inside were deeds, stock certificates, and a letter from a law firm I recognized as my own. It was the complete, formalized transfer of my mother's entire estate. The trust funds, the investments, the properties, into my name and mine alone. It was the fortune my father had killed for, the legacy he had tried to steal. It was now irrevocably mine. How? I stammered, tears welling in my eyes. I had my legal team work with yours to fast-track it all, he said softly. It was always yours, Alara. I just wanted to make sure you had it free and clear as you start this new life. Not as Julian Vance's wife, but as Alara Vance in your own right. It was the most profound gift he could have given me. Not wealth, but sovereignty. The following year was a study in quiet, deepening joy. We split our time between Viridia and Iceland, with occasional trips to Paris or Tokyo. Julian's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The cane was soon discarded for good. He took up swimming, the water granting his body a freedom his legs were still rediscovering. He never ran a marathon, but he could walk for miles with me along the rugged coastlines we both loved, his hand firmly holding mine. I threw myself into the Vance Foundation, using my mother's money to establish a dedicated fund for spinal cord injury research and support for families of paralysis patients. It was my tribute to her, to Julian, to the strange, painful path that had led us to each other. One crisp autumn evening, we were back in our Icelandic cabin. Julian was grilling fish outside while I set the table inside. The sky was beginning to darken, a canvas of deep indigo. A notification popped up on my tablet. A news alert. I opened it. It was a short, brutal piece of news from Viridia. Alexander Reed, facing overwhelming evidence of fraud and embezzlement, and abandoned by all his former allies, had been found dead in his cheap rented apartment. An apparent suicide. Chloe Ward, awaiting her own sentencing, had suffered a complete mental breakdown and had been transferred to a secure psychiatric facility. I stood frozen, the tablet in my hand. There was no satisfaction. No schadenfreude. Just a vast, echoing silence. The last echoes of my first life had finally faded to nothing. Julian came in, bringing the scent of wood smoke and the sea. He saw my face, saw the tablet in my hand. He didn't need to ask. He took the tablet from me, set it aside, and pulled me into his arms. "It's over," he said, his voice sure and final. "It's over," I echoed, resting my head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. He kissed my hair. "Look." I turned. The sky had cleared. And there, beginning as a faint green smudge, were the lights. They erupted in a silent, glorious explosion, more vibrant than I had ever seen them. Rivers of luminescent green, shot through with pink and violet, cascaded across the entire dome of the sky, a celestial celebration. We walked out onto the deck, arms wrapped around each other, and watched. This time there were no tears of past sorrow, only a breathless awe for the breathtaking beauty of the present. "You know," Julian said, his voice soft in my ear, "they say the aurora is caused by charged particles from the sun, colliding with the Earth's atmosphere." I looked up at him. "Yes." He smiled down at me, his love a tangible warmth in the cold air. "I think it's the universe celebrating its second chances." He was my second chance. I was his. This life, this love, this peace. It was all a glorious, unexpected gift. As the lights danced their eternal dance above us, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. Our story wasn't about revenge or debt or even survival anymore. It was simply about this. The quiet moments. The held hands. The shared sunsets. The promise of 1,000 more mornings together. It was not an ending. It was our beginning. The end.